The locksmith's hand shook as he turned the key. Click. That sound, the same one I'd heard every night at exactly 1 in the morning for 8 months straight, now echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. I wanted to tell him to stop, to leave the door locked forever. But my feet stayed planted on the worn carpet, and my throat stayed closed, because deep down, I knew whatever waited inside that room would change everything I thought I knew about my son. Every night at 1 a.m., I heard that lock click shut. Every single night. And I never knew what my son was hiding. The smell hit first when the door swung open. Dust. Old coffee. Something metallic that made my stomach turn. The locksmith stepped back, muttering something about needing payment, but I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Because the walls, God, the walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Strangers' faces staring back at me. Children I'd never met. Families frozen in time. And right there in the center, pictures of me. Me sitting in my chair. Me in the garden. Me at Caroline's grave. Each one dated in Evan's neat handwriting. Dad, day 214. Dad, evening reflection. Dad, after rain. Have you ever felt shut out by someone you love? Like there's a wall between you that keeps growing taller, and no matter how hard you reach, you can't touch them anymore? That's what the last 8 months felt like. My son, my only child, locked himself away from me every night, and I let him because I thought I was respecting his privacy. I thought I was being a good father. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. I paid the locksmith with trembling hands and listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I was alone with my son's secrets. The desk was buried under stacks of letters, dozens of them, addressed to people I'd never heard of. One envelope read, "To the families I couldn't reach." Another said simply, "Forgive me." My chest tightened. Forgive him for what? But it was the computer that stopped my heart. Still on. Still humming. The screen glowed in the dim light, and when I touched the mouse, a folder appeared. Project Lily, it said. My wife's middle name. I stared at those 2 words until they blurred, until the room spun, until I couldn't tell if I was standing or falling. My son was dead. Buried 3 days ago. And somehow, his computer was still alive, still waiting, still holding whatever truth he'd locked away from me. Before I tell you what I found in that folder, please like this video and subscribe for more true life stories that remind us, truth always finds a key. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most. My finger hovered over the mouse. Part of me wanted to run. To lock that door again and pretend I'd never opened it. But Evan's face flashed through my mind, those tired eyes, that desperate smile he'd worn the last time I saw him alive. You'll understand one day, Dad, he'd said. Maybe today was that day. Maybe I was finally ready to understand. I clicked. The video player opened. And there was my son, staring back at me from the grave. Evan wasn't always a mystery. There was a time when I knew him better than I knew myself. Every dream, every fear, every stupid joke that made him laugh until he couldn't breathe. We built things together. Fixed cars in the driveway on Sunday mornings. Argued about baseball like it actually mattered. Caroline used to watch us from the kitchen window and say we were 2 versions of the same stubborn soul. She wasn't wrong. The 3 of us were solid. Unbreakable. Until we weren't. Caroline got sick 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that shows up quiet and leaves loud. We tried everything. Chemo, radiation, trials that promised hope but delivered nothing except bills we couldn't pay and nights we couldn't sleep through. Evan took it the hardest. He'd sit by her bedside for hours, reading her favorite books out loud even after she stopped responding. He'd hold her hand like he could anchor her to this world through sheer willpower. When she died, something in him died too. I thought it was just grief. The normal kind that makes you forget how to smile, how to eat, how to care about anything except the absence left behind. We both felt it. But my grief was quiet, a dull ache that followed me through the garden, through the grocery store, through every empty room in this house. Evan's grief was different. It burned. It consumed. It turned him into someone I barely recognized. 6 months after the funeral, he moved back home. Said he needed time to get his life together. I was grateful. The house felt too big without him, too full of ghosts and memories that ambushed me around every corner. Having Evan there made it easier to breathe. But he didn't come back to heal. He came back to hide. He took over Caroline's old study, the room she used to call the thinking room. It had big oak shelves I'd built with my own hands, a desk that had been in her family for generations, and windows that let in the scent of garden lilacs every spring. That room used to mean peace, warmth. Now it meant secrets. At first, Evan was just working late. That's what he told me, anyway. He'd close the door around 11, type away on his computer, and come out looking exhausted. I didn't push. Didn't ask questions. I figured everyone processes loss differently, and if working helped him cope, then who was I to interfere? But then the pattern started. 1 a.m. Every single night. The lock would click, and I'd hear faint sounds through the walls. Typing, murmuring, sometimes what sounded like voices that weren't his. One night I woke up to a woman crying. Not on TV. Not from outside. From behind that locked door. My heart hammered as I crept down the hallway, pressing my ear against the wood. The crying stopped. The light under the door flickered. Then silence. Heavy and suffocating. The next morning, I asked him about it. Tried to keep my voice casual, like I wasn't terrified of the answer. Son, what do you work on so late? You barely sleep. He looked at me with eyes so tired they seemed bruised. It's not ready yet, Dad. You'll understand one day. The way he said it, like he was apologizing, like he was begging me not to press, sent ice through my veins. Understand what? I asked. But he just shook his head and walked away, leaving me standing there with 1,000 questions and 0 answers. That night, I heard the woman crying again. It became a ritual I couldn't escape. 1 a.m. click. Every night without fail, like clockwork wound by invisible hands. I started staying awake just to hear it, sitting in my chair by the living room window, pretending to read while my ears strained toward the hallway. The lock was a signal. A barrier. A message that said, "This is mine, not yours. Stay out." But I couldn't stay out. Not when the sounds got stranger. Some nights it was typing, fast, urgent, like Evan was racing against time itself. Other nights, low murmurs that could have been him talking to himself or someone on the phone. Once, I swear I heard him say a name. Lily. Soft. Pleading. Like he was praying. My wife's middle name. Caroline Lily Henderson. Why was he saying it in there, alone, in the dark? I tried asking again. Made him breakfast one morning, eggs and toast, the way he liked when he was a kid. We sat at the kitchen table, and I watched him push food around his plate without eating. His hands shook. His eyes had that hollow look people get when they haven't really slept in months, just survived through caffeine and desperation. Evan, I said carefully. You're scaring me. He froze. Fork halfway to his mouth. For a second, I thought he might actually tell me. Might let me in. But then his face softened, and he reached across the table to squeeze my hand. His skin was cold. Trust me, Dad, he whispered. It's better you don't know. Better for who? I wanted to scream. Better for you. For me. For whatever ghost you're chasing in that room. But I didn't. I just nodded like a coward and watched him disappear back behind that door. The next night, I found something. Pure accident. I was putting away his laundry, old habit from when he was young, and opened his desk drawer looking for a place to stash his socks. That's when I saw the photo. Caroline. Smiling. One of the last pictures taken before she got too sick to smile anymore. But on the back, written in Evan's handwriting, were numbers. A sequence I didn't recognize. Something like coordinates, or dates, or a code I'd need a key to crack. Would you respect your child's privacy, or open that door? Comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Because I'm still not sure if what I did next was right or the biggest mistake of my life. I slipped the photo into my pocket. Told myself I'd ask him about it later. But later never came. The sounds got worse. Voices, definitely voices now. Low and urgent. A man's voice I didn't recognize. And Evan, saying something that sounded like, "They can't know yet." Who couldn't know? What were they hiding? I started losing sleep too. Laying awake at night, listening to my son work on something I couldn't see, couldn't touch, couldn't understand. The isolation was suffocating. I felt like I was living with a stranger wearing my son's face. A stranger who loved me enough to protect me, but not enough to trust me. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke up around 7. Evan's bedroom door was open. His bed was made. He was already gone. No note. No text. Just an absence that felt heavier than it should have. I walked to the study. The door was locked, as always. But this time, when I tested the handle, something felt different. Final. His car was gone from the driveway. The key, the one he always kept on him, was gone too. And I had this sinking feeling in my gut, the kind that only comes right before your world falls apart. I told myself I was being paranoid. He'd be back by dinner. We'd talk. I'd finally get him to open up. But the phone rang at 2:30 that afternoon. And my son never came home. The voice on the other end was calm. Professional. The kind of calm people use when they're about to destroy your life and want to cushion the blow. "Mr. Lyle? This is Officer Daniels with the County Sheriff's Department. There's been an accident." Accident. Such a small word for something so massive. I don't remember what I said next. Don't remember grabbing my keys or driving to the hospital or walking through those sterile white hallways that smelled like disinfectant and death. I just remember the nurse's face when she told me, "I'm so sorry." He didn't suffer. Didn't suffer. Like that was supposed to make it okay. Like instant meant painless. Like my son being alive one moment and gone the next was somehow a mercy. They let me see him. His face was peaceful. No bruises. No blood. Just Evan, looking like he was asleep. I touched his hand, and it was still warm. Still him. But not. Never again. The nurse handed me his belongings in a plastic bag. Wallet. Phone. And a flash drive in his jacket pocket. She held it delicately, like it mattered. "He was holding onto this pretty tight," she said. "Must have been important." I stared at that tiny piece of metal and plastic. Something about it felt alive. Like it was the last part of Evan that could still speak. I slipped it into my pocket and walked out of that hospital in a fog so thick I forgot how to breathe. The funeral was quiet. A handful of co-workers I didn't know. Some distant cousins who sent cards but never called. And her. Marina. A woman I'd never met, dressed in black, standing at the edge of the cemetery sobbing like her heart had been ripped out. When everyone else left, she stayed. Just stood there staring at the grave, her shoulders shaking. I walked over. Didn't know what to say. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes and whispered, "I'm so sorry. Did you know my son?" I asked. She nodded. I worked with him. What kind of work? She hesitated, looked around like someone might be listening. Then she leaned in close and said, he was trying to make things right. Right. There was that word again. The same one I'd seen on those letters in his desk drawer. Forgive me. Make things right. What had Evan done that needed forgiving? What had he been trying to fix? Before I could ask, Marina pressed a card into my hand. Her name and number. If you need anything, she said. Then she walked away, leaving me alone with my son's coffin and 1,000 questions that would never get answered. That night, I sat in my chair by the window and stared at the light under the study door. Still locked. Still glowing faintly, like Evan was in there working on his project one last time. I knew it was just the computer. Knew he'd left it on, forgotten to shut it down before he left that morning. But part of me wanted to believe he was still there. Still alive. Still close enough to reach. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and turned it over in my hands. This was it. The last thing my son held onto before he died. Whatever was on here mattered enough to keep with him. To die with. But I couldn't look at it. Not yet. Not without knowing what was behind that door. So I called the locksmith. And when he arrived a week later, when that key turned and the lock clicked open, when the smell of dust and coffee and something metallic hit me like a punch to the gut, I knew there was no going back. The door was open. The secrets were out. And my son's ghost was waiting inside. The locksmith left. I paid him extra to not ask questions, and he took the hint. Now it was just me and the room. Me and the walls covered in strangers' faces. Me and the desk buried under letters I was too afraid to read. Me and the computer that hummed like a living thing, waiting for me to see what Evan had been hiding. I stepped inside slowly. My shoes scraped against papers scattered on the floor, printouts, articles, photos that had fallen from the walls. I picked one up. A family. Mother, father, 2 kids. Smiling at the camera like they had no idea their picture would end up here, pinned to my dead son's wall. Why? Who were they? I moved closer. The photographs were organized in sections. One wall for families. Another for individuals. Men in suits, women in hospital gowns, children with IVs in their arms. And in the center, right above the desk, pictures of us. Me and Caroline on our wedding day. Evan as a baby. The 3 of us at the lake house the summer before she got sick. But mixed in with the memories were newer photos. Recent ones. Me in the garden, digging up weeds. Me sitting in my chair at night, staring out the window. Me at Caroline's grave, kneeling in the grass. Each one was dated. Labeled. Dad Day 214. Like Evan had been documenting me. Studying me. Watching me when I thought I was alone. My hands started shaking. I backed away from the wall and bumped into the desk. Papers slid off and scattered across the floor. I bent down to pick them up and froze. Letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to different people. To the families I couldn't reach. To those I failed. Forgive me for what I did. What did you do, Evan? What were you so desperate to fix? I sank into the desk chair, the same one Caroline used to sit in when she worked on her sketches, and tried to steady my breathing. The air felt thick. Heavy. Like the room itself was pressing down on me, demanding I understand something I wasn't ready to face. My eyes drifted to the computer screen. Still glowing. Still waiting. The folder was right there. Project Lily. My wife's name. My son's secret. I moved the mouse and the screen brightened. Inside the folder were files. Hundreds of them. Documents labeled with names I didn't recognize. Videos titled by date. And one file at the very top, marked Watch this first." My finger hovered over the trackpad. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and craving in equal measure. Once I clicked that file, I couldn't unclick it. Couldn't unknow whatever Evan was about to tell me. The truth would come out, and truths like this, the kind hidden behind locked doors and coded warnings, never came out clean. I thought about walking away, locking the room again, letting Evan keep his secrets. But then I remembered his face in the hospital. Peaceful, innocent, like he'd finally found rest after months of carrying something too heavy to hold. He'd been carrying it alone, protecting me from it. Maybe it was time I carried it for him. I clicked play. The video loaded, and there was Evan, sitting in this exact chair, in this exact room, looking pale and exhausted, with red-rimmed eyes that had seen too much. He stared directly into the camera, directly at me, and his voice came through the speakers, shaking but steady. "Dad," he said, "if you're watching this, I'm gone." My throat closed. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't look away. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he continued. "But I can't carry it anymore." The screen flickered. Evan's face wavered, then steadied. He looked down at his hands, took a deep breath, and started talking. And everything I thought I knew about my son shattered into pieces I'd never be able to put back together. Evan's voice cracked on the recording. "When Mom got sick, I lost my mind. Not in the way people talk about, not like I couldn't function. I lost my mind in the quiet way, the dangerous way, where you start believing you can fix things that aren't meant to be fixed." I gripped the edge of the desk. My knuckles went white. "I was working at a pharmaceutical consulting firm back then," he continued. "Nothing special. Just data analysis for clinical trials. But when Mom's cancer spread and the doctors said there was nothing left to try, I started looking for options they weren't telling us about. Experimental treatments. Underground trials. Anything." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. On screen, behind him, I could see the same walls now surrounding me. Empty then, waiting to be filled with evidence I didn't yet understand. I found a company. Biogenesis Medical. They were running trials for a new pancreatic cancer treatment. Stage 4 patients. The kind Mom was. But she didn't qualify because of her age and her previous chemo history. They had strict protocols. His jaw tightened. So I falsified her records. The words hit me like a fist to the chest. Falsified. My son. My honest, careful son who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants as a kid. I changed her medical history in the system. Made it look like she met the criteria. Got her enrolled in the trial. Evan's face crumpled. "I thought I was saving her, Dad. I thought I was giving her a chance. But the treatment, it wasn't ready. It wasn't safe. And I'd pushed past safety protocols to get her in." I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. The room spun around me. Mom died 3 days after her second infusion. The doctors said it was the cancer, but I knew. I knew it was the treatment. And I knew it was my fault. His voice dropped to a whisper. "But that's not the worst part." How could there be a worst part? After she died, I tried to come clean. Tried to report what I'd done. But the company, they found out I'd altered records. They threatened me. Said if I exposed the trial failures, they'd destroy me legally. Make sure I never worked again. But more than that, he looked directly at the camera, directly at me. They kept running the trials. Kept enrolling patients. And people kept dying. My stomach turned. The photographs on the wall. The families. The children. All those faces staring back at me. I couldn't let it go, Dad. I couldn't just walk away knowing people were dying because I'd opened a door I should have left closed. So I started collecting evidence. Every patient who got hurt. Every family that lost someone. Every document that proved biogenesis knew their treatment was killing people and hid it anyway. He gestured to the room around him, the room I was sitting in now. This is Project Lily. Named after Mom. My way of making her death mean something. Marina helped me. She lost her sister in the same trial. We've been building a case for 8 months. Gathering testimonies. Documenting everything. 8 months. The same 8 months he'd been locking this door at 1 a.m. every night. I was supposed to hand everything over to the attorneys next week. They were ready to file a class action lawsuit. But if you're watching this, his voice broke. If you're watching this, something happened to me. And I need you to finish it. The video froze on his face. Tears streaming down his cheeks. Eyes begging for forgiveness I didn't know how to give. Then the screen went black. And a new window popped up. An email notification. Subject line, Project Lily, final evidence upload. Files successfully synced. Ready for submission. The timestamp read, this morning. 6:47 a.m. 2 hours before Evan died. My son had finished his work. Had uploaded everything he'd been fighting for. And then he'd gotten in his car and driven straight into whatever fate was waiting for him. I sat there in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of people my son had tried to save, and finally understood why he'd locked me out. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting me. From the guilt. From the danger. From the truth that his love for his mother had cost other people their mothers too. And now he was asking me to carry it forward. The computer pinged again. Another email. Subject, we know you have the files. My blood ran cold. I stared at that email for a full minute before my hands stopped shaking enough to click it. No sender name. Just a blank address full of random numbers and letters. The message was short. The flash drive. The files. Hand them over, or you'll regret finishing what your son started. They knew. Whoever killed those patients, whoever threatened Evan, whoever made him spend 8 months hiding in this room, they knew I had everything now. And they were watching. I slammed the laptop shut and grabbed my phone. Marina's card was still in my wallet from the funeral. My fingers fumbled as I dialed. It rang 4 times. Pick up. Please pick up. Hello. Her voice sounded raw, tired. Marina, it's Patrick. Evan's father. Silence. Then, did you find it? The office. I found everything. The video. The files. All of it. My voice cracked. He told me what he did. What you've been doing together. She let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. He really did it. God, he really finished it. Marina, I just got an email. Someone threatening me. They know about the flash drive. What? Her voice went sharp. You still have it? The drive Evan died with? Yes. It's in my pocket. Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Lyle. Don't go home. Don't go anywhere you normally go. They've probably been watching you since the funeral. My skin crawled. I thought about those photos on Evan's wall. All the pictures of me. Had someone else been taking pictures too? Where are you right now? Marina asked. Still in the house. In his office. Get out. Now. Pack the flash drive somewhere they won't think to look. Not your wallet. Not your pocket. Somewhere creative. Then meet me at the Bluebird Diner on Route 9. You know it. Yeah, I know it. 1 hour. Don't use your car. Take a cab or walk if you have to. I'll explain everything when you get here." She hung up before I could ask the 100 questions burning through my brain. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds before my survival instincts finally kicked in. "Move. Now." I grabbed the flash drive from my pocket and looked around the room. Where would Evan hide something important? I thought about his childhood, his habits, his quirks. Then I remembered. Caroline's jewelry box. The one with the false bottom she'd used to hide birthday money from me when we were young and broke. Evan had watched her use it 1,000 times. I ran to my bedroom and pulled the box from my dresser. Pressed the hidden panel. It clicked open, revealing the small space underneath. I dropped the flash drive inside and snapped it shut. Not perfect, but better than carrying it on me. Then I walked out of that house like it wasn't mine anymore. Like I was leaving behind everything I'd built for the last 60 years. Maybe I was. The Bluebird Diner smelled like burnt coffee and grease, exactly the way it had for the past 30 years. Marina was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back in a messy knot. She watched me walk in like she was measuring whether I'd been followed. I slid into the seat across from her. "Tell me everything." "My sister Rebecca was in the same trial as your wife. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She was only 41. Marina's hands wrapped around a coffee cup like she needed the warmth. "Biogenesis promised us hope. Promised the treatment was safe, effective, carefully monitored. She lasted 2 weeks after her first dose. Organ failure. They said it was the cancer. I knew better." "How'd you meet Evan?" "Support group for trial families. He showed up 6 months after your wife passed. Looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Kept saying he'd done something unforgivable." She smiled sadly. "We were all carrying guilt. But his was different. Heavier. When he finally told me what he'd done, falsifying records, getting Caroline into the trial, I should have hated him. But I didn't. Because he was the only person willing to fight back." If you believe truth always finds a way out, hit that like button. It helps stories like this reach more hearts. Stories about people who chose courage over silence, even when it cost them everything. "We started collecting evidence together," Marina continued. "Patient testimonies. Internal documents Evan managed to access through his old consulting connections. Medical records that proved Biogenesis knew their treatment was dangerous and continued anyway. We had everything we needed for a massive lawsuit. Wrongful death. Criminal negligence. The kind of case that destroys companies." "So what happened?" "They found out. Someone inside the legal team we were working with must have tipped them off. 3 weeks ago, Evan got his first threat. Then his apartment got broken into. Nothing stolen, just a message. They'd been inside. They could get to him any time." She met my eyes. "He was supposed to submit everything yesterday. We were so close." "The car accident," I said slowly. "You don't think it was an accident?" Marina's jaw tightened. "Your son was the most careful driver I've ever met. Never even got a speeding ticket. And suddenly he loses control on a straight road in perfect weather." The air left my lungs. Murder. They were saying my son was murdered. That someone had killed him to keep him quiet. Marina's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went white. "We need to go. Now." "What? Why?" She showed me the screen. A text from an unknown number. "Tell the old man to stop digging. Last warning." We ran. Marina's apartment was small. 3rd floor walk up in a building that smelled like old carpet and someone's burned dinner. She unlocked 3 different locks before pushing the door open, and I understood why when I saw the inside. Papers everywhere. taped to walls, spread across tables, stacked in boxes labeled with dates and names. Her living room looked exactly like Evan's office, a war room for a battle I'd just inherited. "This is everything," she said, gesturing around. 8 months of work. 23 documented deaths linked directly to the biogenesis trial. 47 more cases of severe complications they covered up. Internal emails proving the board knew the treatment was killing people. I walked slowly through the chaos, reading names on file folders. Jessica Morales, age 39. Robert Chin, age 56. Amanda Foster, age 43. People who'd trusted doctors and died for it. People whose families deserved to know the truth. "Does anyone else know about this?" I asked. "Besides us, the attorneys we were working with. Daniel Moss and his partner. They're with a firm that specializes in pharmaceutical litigation. Good people. But we can't risk contacting them directly now. Not until we know who leaked information to biogenesis." I pulled Caroline's jewelry box from my jacket. I'd grabbed it before leaving the house. Popped open the false bottom and held up the flash drive. "Everything on here?" Marina's eyes widened. "That's it? That's Evan's drive. He was holding it when he died." She took it from my hands like it was made of glass. Walked to her laptop and plugged it in. The screen filled with folders. Documents. Video files. Spreadsheets full of data I couldn't begin to understand. "This is incredible," she whispered. "He organized everything. Made it ironclad. Any lawyer would kill for evidence this clean. So what do we do with it?" "We finish what Evan started." She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw hope instead of grief. "We find someone who can't be bought. Someone with a platform big enough that biogenesis can't silence them. And we burn this whole thing to the ground." That night, Marina made calls while I sat on her worn couch and finally let myself fall apart. I cried for my son. For my wife. For all the people whose faces stared at me from those walls. I cried because Evan had carried this alone, and I'd been too blind to see it. Too comfortable in my ignorance to push past that locked door and demand he let me help. But crying doesn't bring people back. Doesn't undo the damage. So I wiped my face and stood up and decided that if my son could spend 8 months fighting for justice, I could spend whatever time I had left finishing it. Marina hung up the phone. "I found someone. Investigative journalist named Sarah Chen. Won a Pulitzer for exposing medical fraud. She's willing to meet us tomorrow. Can we trust her?" Evan trusted her. He'd been in contact with her for the last month, feeding her background information. She's been waiting for the evidence to publish. My heart stuttered. He was going to hand everything to her? Yes. But he wanted the lawyers involved first. Wanted to make sure families got compensation, not just headlines. Marina's voice softened. "He thought about everything, Mr. Lyle. Every detail. Every consequence. He wasn't just exposing them, he was making sure their victims got justice." I thought about the office. The photographs. The letters addressed to families. My son hadn't been hiding from guilt. He'd been building a monument to it. Turning his shame into something that mattered. "Tomorrow then," I said. "We hand it over." But Marina's phone buzzed again before I could finish. She looked at the screen and her face went slack. "No. No, no, no." "What?" "They're here. Someone just broke into my building." We heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Deliberate. Then a knock on the door. Not aggressive. Almost polite. But somehow worse because of it. Marina grabbed the flash drive and shoved it back into my hands. "The fire escape. Go." Now, I'm not leaving you. They want the evidence, not me. Go. She pushed me toward the window. The knocking got louder. A voice called through the door, "Ms. Reyes, we just want to talk." I climbed through the window onto the metal fire escape. 3 stories up, rust flaking under my feet. Marina was right behind me when I heard the door splinter. They'd kicked it in. We ran down those metal stairs like our lives depended on it. Because they did. Behind us, footsteps pounded. A man's voice shouted, "Stop! Just give us the drive." We hit the alley running. Marina grabbed my hand and pulled me through back streets I didn't know existed. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I kept moving because my son had kept moving. Had kept fighting even when they threatened him. Even when they came for him. We ended up at a 24-hour laundromat, gasping for air between rows of washing machines. Marina pulled out her phone with shaking hands and called someone. "Sarah? It's Marina. We're in trouble. They found us." She listened, then nodded. Okay, yes. I understand." She hung up and looked at me. "Sarah says to meet her at the courthouse tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. She'll have attorneys there and news crews. If we hand over the evidence publicly, Biogenesis can't touch us without exposing themselves." "Will we make it that long?" "We have to," Marina said. "We're all your son has left." I looked down at the flash drive in my hand. Such a small thing. But inside it was everything. Every person Evan had tried to save. Every family that deserved answers. Every piece of proof that his mother's death hadn't been meaningless. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. If we survived the night. 6 a.m. came cold and gray. Marina and I had spent the night in her car, parked behind a grocery store, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. Neither of us slept much. Every sound, every car passing, every voice in the distance, made my heart jump. But we'd made it. Dawn broke, ugly and beautiful at the same time. The courthouse steps were empty when we arrived. For one terrible moment, I thought Sarah had abandoned us. That we'd been set up. Then I saw her, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a camera crew setting up behind her. "You're Evan's father," she said when we approached. Not a question. Statement. "I'm sorry for your loss. He was a brave man. He was a good man trying to fix a mistake," I said. "That's all." Sarah nodded like she understood the difference. "I've been investigating biogenesis for 2 years. Your son gave me the pieces I was missing. With what's on that drive, we can finally prove everything. But I need to record your statement. Get it on camera. Once it's out there, they can't make it disappear." I'd never been on camera before. Never wanted to be. But I thought about Evan sitting in that office, recording his confession for me. Putting his truth on video so it couldn't be denied. I could do the same for him. The camera started rolling. Sarah asked me to explain how I found the office, what I discovered inside, what Evan had told me in his video. I talked about the photographs, the evidence, the 8 months my son spent locked away building a case against the people who'd killed his mother. I talked about Caroline and how much we'd loved her. How desperate we'd been. How Evan's desperation had led him down a path he couldn't turn back from. But he didn't run, I said, looking directly into the camera. He could have walked away. Could have saved himself. Instead, he spent every night fighting for people he'd never met. People who died like my wife died. That's who my son was. Not perfect. Not innocent. But trying. Always trying to make things right. Sarah interviewed Marina next. She told Rebecca's story. Told the stories of the other families she and Evan had contacted. 23 names. 23 lives stolen by greed disguised as medicine. By 7 a.m., other people started arriving. Attorneys from the firm Marina had mentioned. More journalists. Families Sarah had contacted. People who'd lost someone in the biogenesis trials and had been waiting years for answers. The courthouse steps filled with faces full of grief and hope and rage. All of them there because my son had opened a door nobody else would touch. Sarah held up the flash drive for the cameras. This contains 8 months of evidence compiled by Evan Lyle before his death. Patient testimonies, internal biogenesis documents, medical records proving the company knowingly administered a fatal treatment to vulnerable patients. Today, this evidence goes public. Today, we demand justice. The crowd erupted. People crying, shouting, holding photos of their loved ones up to the cameras. I stood there watching it all unfold and felt Evan beside me. Not literally. Not like a ghost. Just the presence of him. The weight of what he'd built finally lifting off shoulders that weren't there anymore. Within hours, the story broke everywhere. News stations, websites, social media. Biogenesis Medical scrambled to deny everything, but their denials sounded hollow against the mountain of proof. By that afternoon, federal investigators had announced they were opening a criminal probe. By evening, the company's stock had crashed. By the end of the week, 3 executives were arrested. By the end of the month, families were filing lawsuits. And by the end of that terrible beautiful year, Biogenesis Medical was bankrupt and dismantled. Every victim's family received compensation. Not enough to bring their loved ones back, but enough to prove that truth mattered. That lies couldn't stay buried forever. At every hearing, every press conference, every moment the story moved forward, they mentioned Evan's name. The whistleblower who died trying to expose corruption. The man who turned his guilt into justice. Not a hero without scars, but a person who chose courage when it would have been easier to stay silent. I kept one photograph from his office. Just one. It was a picture of Caroline, taken a week before she died. She's smiling even though she's exhausted, even though the cancer is eating her from the inside. Evan had written something on the back. For Mom. So her suffering stops someone else's. That's what he'd been doing. All those nights locked away. All that secrecy and distance. He'd been trying to turn her death into something meaningful. And he'd done it. Not perfectly. Not without cost. But he'd done it. Marina and I stayed friends. She'd send me updates about the case, about new families coming forward, about how Evan's evidence kept uncovering more victims. We'd meet for coffee sometimes and talk about them, Evan and Rebecca. The 2 people we'd loved who'd been taken by the same evil. The 2 people who'd fought back even when it cost them everything. One afternoon, maybe 6 months after it all started, Marina brought me an envelope. "This came for you," she said. From one of the families. Inside was a photo. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, holding a birthday cake. The note with it read, "My mom died in the trial. But because of your son, I'll have enough money for college. Thank you for raising a man who cared about strangers." I cried reading that. Cried like I hadn't let myself cry since the funeral. Because Evan had done it. Had made his mother's death mean something. Had saved people he'd never meet by refusing to let guilt destroy him. Justice doesn't erase the past. Doesn't bring people back or undo mistakes. But it proves that truth matters. That one person, locked in a room at 1 a.m. every night, can change the world if they're stubborn enough. Brave enough. Desperate enough to try. My son was all of those things. A year and 3 months after Evan died, I went back to the office. I'd left it exactly as I'd found it. Walls covered in photographs, desk buried in papers, computer still humming with evidence that had changed everything. Marina had suggested I clear it out, turn it back into the thinking room Caroline had loved. But I couldn't. Not yet. I stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. The smell had faded. Just dust now. No more coffee. No more metallic fear. Just the quiet remains of a battle that had already been won. I walked to the desk and sat in Caroline's old chair. Ran my fingers over the wood I'd built with my own hands 40 years ago. This room had seen so much. Caroline's sketches and dreams. Evan's guilt and redemption. My grief and understanding. It was more than a room now. It was a testimony. Proof that love and pain can create something bigger than themselves. The photographs were still there. All those faces. All those families. But they didn't look haunting anymore. They looked grateful. Vindicated. Their stories had been heard because my son had refused to look away. I thought about taking them down. Packing them away. But then I realized, this was Evan's monument. His legacy. Not the guilt or the mistakes, but what he'd built from them. Removing the evidence would be like pretending none of it mattered. And it mattered. Every face. Every name. Every night he'd spent locked in here fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. So I left it. All of it. Exactly as he'd arranged it. But I did add something. One final note. I wrote it on a piece of paper and pinned it to the wall under the last photograph Evan had taken of me. The one where I'm kneeling at Caroline's grave, talking to her like she can hear me. The note said, "You were always the man your mother believed you'd become. You made her proud. You made me proud. Rest now, son. Your work is finished." I read it out loud to the empty room. To Evan's ghost, if ghosts exist. To the memory of who he'd been and who he'd become. Then I stood up, took one last look at the walls covered in justice, and walked to the door. My hand touched the lock. The same lock I'd heard click every night at 1 a.m. The lock that had kept me out while Evan fought his private war. I could lock it again. Seal the room like a tomb. Let it exist as a shrine nobody else would see. But that wasn't what Evan would have wanted. He hadn't locked the door to hide forever. He'd locked it to protect what he was building until it was ready to see daylight. And now it had. Now the whole world knew what he'd done. So I left the door open. Wide open. Let the light from the hallway spill into that room for the first time in over a year. Let the secrets breathe. Let the truth exist without barriers. I walked away knowing I'd never lock that door again. Some doors aren't meant to stay closed. Especially the ones that lead us to forgiveness. To understanding. To the messy, complicated truth about the people we love. Evan wasn't perfect. He made mistakes that cost lives. But he spent every day after trying to make those mistakes matter less than the justice he created from them. That's all any of us can do. Acknowledge the damage. Then try to heal more than we hurt. I still miss him. Still wake up sometimes expecting to hear that lock click at 1 a.m. Still catch myself making enough dinner for two before I remember I'm alone. But I'm not ashamed of him anymore. Not angry. Not confused. I'm proud. Proud that when my son was faced with an impossible choice, carry his guilt alone or expose it and fight, he chose to fight. Chose justice over comfort. Chose other people's lives over his own safety. That's what heroes do. Not the perfect ones from movies. The real ones. The ones who mess up and spend the rest of their lives trying to fix it. The ones who lock themselves away at 1 a.m. every night, fighting battles nobody else knows about, building proof that truth doesn't have to stay buried forever. Evan did that. My son. My flawed, brave, stubborn son. And because of him, 23 families got answers. Hundreds more got compensation. A corrupt company was destroyed. And somewhere, in a world slightly better than it was before, Caroline's death finally meant something beyond just loss. That's what Project Lily was always about. Not hiding, not running, but transformation. Turning grief into purpose, guilt into redemption. One locked door into evidence that changed everything. I visit his grave every week now. Bring lilacs from the garden when they bloom in spring, the ones that used to drift through the office window when Caroline worked on her sketches. I tell him about the families still reaching out, the cases still unfolding, the ripples of justice still spreading from what he started. And I thank him for protecting me, for trusting me enough to leave that video, for believing I'd finish what he couldn't. You were right, son, I say to the headstone marked with his name. I understand now. I understand everything. Then I go home to the house that's quieter now, but somehow more peaceful. To the office with its open door and its walls full of faces that got their justice. To the life my son gave me by showing me that truth always finds a key, even when it takes 8 months, a locked door, and a father who finally learned to look past his own grief. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. We share real stories about love, loss, redemption, and the incredible things ordinary people do when they choose courage over comfort. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your words inspire others who need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles. And if you know someone who needs this message, share it with them. Because stories like Evan's remind us that it's never too late to make things right. It's never too late to open the locked doors we've been afraid to face. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this family. And remember, some secrets deserve to stay buried. But truth always deserves to see daylight.